I'm Kyle Feingold. I am co-founder at Guiding Bright Minds. And welcome to the Guiding Bright Minds webinar series. So we are on webinar number 9, titled Autism, Finding Flexibility, Structure, and Support. It's actually a 2-part series. You're here tonight for part 1, which is focused around providing that support to your children. Part 2 might be even more important, as that is really focused around providing the structure, support, and flexibility to you as parents. And that'll be on June 21st. So if you're here tonight, or if you're watching this as on a recording, we'll make sure you get that information as well so you can join us then. All right, so we're here tonight with Jennifer Wilger, the co-founder and executive director of Temple Grandin School in Boulder, and Lisa Baba. Did I get that right, Lisa? Lisa is the director of community relations at the Temple Grandin School. And then we have 3 incredible parents here to share their journeys with us as well. So really looking forward to this webinar. Before I hand it over to our guest speakers, I just want to tell you a little bit about Guiding Bright Minds. So Guiding Bright Minds is a community meant for parents who have children that are neurodiverse learners. So Guiding Bright Minds, we believe that all children who learn differently have incredible strengths and talents that we like to call superpowers. We believe that through accessing your children's superpowers and putting an emphasis on their strengths, that all these children will build incredible confidence, self-esteem, and skills to be our next generation of contributors and leaders. So why Guiding Bright Minds? Why did this come to fruition? Well, first, I grew up with dyslexia that was diagnosed in the 5th grade, and undiagnosed ADHD, and I'm an outside-of-the-box learner and thinker. And for me, school was difficult, and teachers didn't understand me. And making friends, maybe like some of your kids, was even more challenging for me. In a nutshell, I lacked the confidence, the self-esteem, and I didn't know where my strengths were. With my situation in school, all I knew is that school was difficult. Teachers always told me what wasn't working and what I needed to work on, and I didn't feel smart. I know now, 40-some years later, that my dyslexia and ADHD are actually my superpowers. And I like to say I think more things before breakfast than most people think all day long. My ideas and my thoughts, they're very outside the box and big picture. And I know how to express my ideas, but executing these ideas for me, that's a whole different story. So I was inspired 17 years ago to start Results Learning, an academic coaching and professional development organization focused on ADHD, executive functioning, and dyslexia, and we're still helping students in Denver today. So today, my wife of 20 years and I, we're raising an incredible child of our own, who is an outside-of-the-box learner, neurodiverse, and incredible. He's an amazing learner and thinker. Well, through all of these experiences, I realized that there's so many students, so many children who feel similar to the way I did growing up. And really all of these experiences have led my wife and I to find Guiding Bright Minds. So Guiding Bright Minds is an organization with a huge vision to change the perception of neurodiverse learners so that they're solely recognized for their strengths. So today, Guiding Bright Minds is a single place where parents can go to find information on learning differences, neurodiversities, explore their children's superpowers, and connect with screened and trusted professionals in schools like Temple Grandin School who serve our amazing kids. So our organization and the professionals in our community are here to guide you on your path to addressing your child's needs and accessing their incredible strengths. So today we're on the ground floor of this effort, and we want to build this community for you and with you as a community who believes that diverse learners are incredible. So I'm going to go ahead and include a link once we hand it over. I'm going to include a link to Guiding Bright Minds, the website, as well as our newsletter in the chat. I'll also send this to you along with the presentation, a recording of the presentation tonight, and the handouts and the PowerPoint to you following the webinar tomorrow morning. So from a Guiding Bright Minds perspective, please sign up for our newsletter so you can receive our invitations to our webinars that we conduct every 2 weeks. We consistently have new videos and blogs and articles all focused around raising and supporting neurodiverse learners. We'll send you a link to our Facebook page as well. One note before I hand it over, our next webinar is 2 weeks from today. It's titled ADHD and Executive Functioning, Thriving During Your Child's Middle School Years. We all know that's a challenge, regardless of the profile of your child. So the date, again, is May 5th. It's at 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And our guest speaker will be Roxanne Turner, who is a certified ADHD coach. So with that, we're ready to begin this evening and get into the meat of our presentation. Our presentation today and our guest presenters, really the topic today is, again, finding flexibility, structure, and support. And remember, it's a two-part series. Tonight's part 1, and it's focused around supporting your children. So our guest speakers tonight, and again, thank you, Jen and Lisa, for being here. First, Jen Wilger is the co-founder and executive director of the Temple Grandin School in Boulder, Colorado. Jennifer is the parent of a young adult son with Asperger's syndrome, a proud member of the TGS first graduating class, who's now pursuing his master's in divinity at Seattle Pacific University. And that is just so awesome. So I'm really glad that you shared that. Thank you, Jen. And since 1998, Jen's devoted intensive time and study to understanding neurodiverse learning styles and was excited to contribute to the founding of the Temple Grandin School in 2011. Jennifer's passion for creating dynamic, supportive learning communities span a wide variety of ages and settings, from preschool to high school. Prior to TGS, she worked as a special educator, a preschool teacher, a freelance writer, a curriculum development specialist, and at TGS, Jen is a resource to all staff, students, and families. So Jen, thank you for being here. And then I want to introduce Lisa. So Lisa Baba is the Director of Community Relations at Temple Grandin School. She's passionate about neurodiverse people and understanding and embracing who they are, including expressing their abilities and interests in the world. As well, she loves to support parents along with their journey of guiding their children toward adulthood while maintaining their own sense of self and pursuing their own dreams. Lisa has a background in publishing, a certification in life coaching, a credential as a board-certified behavior therapist, and experience in parenting her own neurodiverse young children. So we also have with us, and I'm going to let these very experienced, incredible parents introduce themselves. But we have Kristen, who is an alumni parent and also currently serving on the board of directors at TGS. And then we have George and Beverly, who are current parents of a TGS student. So with that, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Lisa and Jen to kick off Autism, Finding Flexibility, Support, and Structure. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm going to share my screen so that we can see the presentation. And we
Sounds
also
great.
give parents some time to introduce themselves. So that's going to come up in just a minute here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kyle, for that wonderful introduction. It was great to hear about Guiding Bright Minds, and we're really excited to be part of that community. When you and Tiffany first reached out to us at TGS, and I saw all the amazing professionals that were starting to circle around and gather together in this endeavor. I've been in this community a long time, and there were a lot of familiar names, and so it's great to be coming together around these amazing students.
Awesome. I'm so glad to have Temple Grandin School.
Yeah. So why we're all here, we all share the challenges. I mean, as amazing as these kids are, I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell it like it is. There are a lot of challenges involved in raising a neurodiverse child. Some of them are constant challenges. So Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just dive right in. Some of those challenges are constant. Some of them are a little bit more transient or situational relative to our current circumstances. So we will talk about those some, but first, let's focus in on our neurodiverse students and really think about who we're talking about here. Neurodiversity is a challenge, but it's also a gift, as Kyle has so eloquently teed up for us. These are kids who see the world differently, and as adults in their future, we know they're going to do great things with their big ideas, but it may be a little difficult for them to fit in with the typical teenage, which is where we were working at Temple Grandin School. Teenage environments aren't necessarily built for them. So they can have some challenges there with school. Sensitivities, those can be really relevant to these kids, both the physical sensitivities, whether it's a sensory input difference, too loud, too hot, too cold, any of those things, or an emotional sensitivity. You hear a lot about the social emotional lives of gifted kids, and these kids certainly fall in that ballpark. They are gifted with empathy. And if you're a parent of a student with autism and the world is telling you that your child doesn't have empathy, I'm here to tell you that that is not true. They do, we know they do. And in fact, they often have greater empathy. They just take it all on. So that's a challenge for them and for us as their parents. There also can be sensitive or extra sensitive to criticism. And that can be real directed criticism, or it can be perceived criticism. One of my other children is a boy who's now going to graduate from high school, but as a middle schooler, he was the boy who cried because he was so sensitive. And that's a hard place to be as a middle school boy in kind of the rough and tumble world we live in. But yet that's where these kids are, and that can lead them to experience anxiety, depression, as a result of these sensitivities and of their asynchronicity. So we've heard a lot about asynchronous with regard to the pandemic and work and school. Our kids can experience asynchronicity in their intellect. They can be great at math and struggle with writing, or they can be a great writer and struggle with math. I'm here to tell you that too, that in the autism spectrum, there are both of those things and other variations in between. My own son was definitely a writing good, math not so good. And at Temple Grandin School, we see both of those things. There can also be asynchronicity just in the maturity level. You know, they're intellectually maybe advanced up to college and beyond, yet their social maturity is more like middle school or a little below. And that is really baffling to school systems, to society, to the world. But I think it can serve them well in being able to interact with people at a variety of different levels. The last thing that we think about in terms of challenges are, we have it on the slide here as whole person issues. I also like to refer to it as I impacts. So the things that impact them in their self, their identity. You know, how are your children thinking and feeling about their neurodiversity? Do they have a label? And if they do, are they comfortable with that label? Do they know what it means to them? Is it a big part of who they are? Or is it a little part of who they are, and how can we help them kind of have control of determining that themselves? Then interaction, many in the autism spectrum have delayed skills in the social domain, so they have difficulty doing it and catching the nuances of interactions that come in dynamic social situations. They also have difficulty finding like-minded peers sometimes out there in the general populace. And so that holds them back from getting more practice in their interactions, which then it kind of gets to be a vicious cycle. So finding those peers that they can really have the safe place to try out and work on those relationships is a challenge. And then of course there's independence challenges, executive function, daily living, community access. A lot of things have to come together in order to get this I, this self, this child to step out into the world. And this feels like a lot. And, you know, I hope as I'm going through this, it's hitting you as no wonder this is hard. And not as, oh, what a bummer. Because it's not a bummer, it just is. And these are the things that we know, and these are the things that we can work on. So let's think about our current circumstances that we find with challenging. So we are in, drum roll please, a worldwide, global, international pandemic. At our house, we like to think of how many ways we can say that and use the same word, same concept, but different words. These are unprecedented times. I'm getting tired of saying it. I'm getting tired of hearing it. We're all just tired. And I think the accumulation of all these things makes even things that are normally easy feel hard. I even, for myself, I think I'm out of practice on like making a phone call or going to make a transaction in person. That it all feels hard. And so if it's that for us, it's even more so for our kiddos. Masks are a reality of this. And at Temple Grandin School, we've been in person all pretty much this whole time. And so our students and staff are masking all day long, 8 to 3. And that wears on you. The Zoom fatigue, we're looking at ourselves on the screen and scanning to see other people's reactions on the screen. Just the fatigue of looking at the screens all day long. It's not really natural and it makes us tired. The isolation, which is part of what we've all been through lately, being at home. And for kids, I don't think we fully internalize how this impacts children, and especially teenagers. As adults, we're able to kind of manage it, compartmentalize it, but for them, this is the time when they would be differentiating from us, separating from their parents and their families, and really taking from their peers and their friends, their social worth, and setting up their identity and figuring a lot of stuff out that they're just not able to do in isolation. So that's been really challenging right now. Anxiety as a result of all of that, we'll look at it a little bit more closely in the next slide, but they're saying 46, so almost half, 46% of parents are reporting new or worsening mental health conditions on the part of their teenage children right now. So that's really significant, and we haven't seen the end of it yet, and something worth paying attention to. With our kids on the spectrum especially, there can be a lot of anxiety just about the coronavirus, the COVID-19, if the germs are there and how it can be contracted, and what if my family gets it or someone I know gets it, and maybe they know people who have gotten it and have had some bad outcomes with it. So that anxiety piece. And then with social interactions, I think this one is interesting. Our kids, some of them, and I've heard this, are relieved from the pressure of having to go out and be social all the time. And so that's a nice little brief respite if you can get around some of these other things. But I think when they get back to doing it, as we are starting to see that light on the horizon, it's just going to intensify the challenge, because they've kind of gone backwards in their anxiety and in their skills in interacting socially. So I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's something that we're going to be working on for a while. All right, next slide. And so I love this Maslow's hierarchy that has the Wi-Fi at the bottom there, because I think on the one hand, this is how our kids see it. Like if you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't have anything. And if you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, the slide's a little small. It's basically you start at the bottom and meeting your basic needs for food and shelter, and then kind of work up. And as your more foundational needs are met, then you're better able to have the mental space and the capacity to learn, to form relationships, to pursue your own creativity and share that in the world. But when you think about where we are now, we had supply chain issues, and we couldn't get food, and we couldn't get toilet paper, and we couldn't get all those things. And so that bottom layer was kind of wonky. And then stepping up to the next layer of safety, security, freedom from fear, well, there's that anxiety piece going right in there. And then going up to belonging with family and friends, that's messed with too. So really, when you get to those top two tiers, the learning has got to be impacted, right? This is what's going on with our kids, that their learning is impacted to getting to self-esteem and all of that. So we've got some big challenges. I don't think, again, I'm not here to doom and gloom, but just to kind of set the stage. But we do have some control about what we do about those things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how these three elements, structure, flexibility, and support, can help us help our kids overcome these challenges. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to start our conversation.
So as Jen said, we are going to start our conversation about what can help our kids navigate these constant and current challenges that we're facing right now and that they're facing right now. And, excuse me. And as we said in the title of our webinar, there are three elements that can help our children thrive, and they are structure, flexibility, and support. We're going to talk about these three elements and each one and their relationship with each other. So we can help our kids navigate their lives by providing each one of these in turn when they're needed and creating a relationship between among all three of these. Now, when you look at this triangle, it's a nice, neat looking triangle, but often when we're actually living it, it looks a little bit more like this. So it's all over the place, right? We decide that we want to, our kids maybe need some more structure. And so we start to create a schedule and we're going to fit everything into that. And then we find that our kids start to react to the fact that there's so much structure. So then we go over to the flexibility and we start adding some more flexibility, and then things start spiraling a little out of control. And we figure, oh no, we got to try to go get some support. So we look for a therapist, we look for a tutor, and we have to wait and find, what's just the right fit. And in the meantime, the structure's falling apart, so we got to shore that up again. And, I don't need to describe it because you're living it, right? We've all lived it. So we just want to acknowledge that it's chaotic. And especially now in these times, it's even more chaotic. I have seen through the Zoom lens, I've watched parents as they've tried to help their kids with school and with behavior, and it's just been so difficult in the circumstances that we find ourselves in now. So we want to acknowledge that it's chaotic, and we want to say that like we mentioned, this is a two-part seminar, and the second part is for you all dealing with the chaos and supporting you as you support your kids. So definitely pay attention to that date and time and sign up for that, because we really want to support you with that. But today we are going to focus on the kids and on these three different elements. And Jen's going to kick us off by talking about the element of structure. And we're also going to hear along the way, we're going to hear from our fabulous parents who have a lot to share with us.
Thank you. So when we talk about structure, we are talking about creating a container in which learners can reasonably expect life to be fairly consistent. We're not talking about a literal container. We're talking about a space. We're talking about your environment, creating a context for consistency in the life of your child. So three kind of pieces of that fall into the overall structure that you could provide would be home, school, and extracurricular. We'll talk a little bit about each of those, but also just to throw in that having a structure and creating a structure, it's a weird time to be talking about structure, because our structures that we had in place have been kind of ripped apart or yanked out from under us. And so just to acknowledge that you might have had a lot more help creating structure for your kids before this strange time we're living in. And now that's kind of come back on us. And so it's good for us to just kind of embrace that and accept that and think about how we can create the structure that is so helpful for our kids. So starting with home life, you know, having a schedule doesn't have to mean, you know, you have a literal schedule with posted times. Although if your children are young, having something visual like that can be helpful. But what we're really talking about here is routines. So having a morning routine, having an evening routine, kind of going through things consistently at those different parts of your day so that your kids know what to expect. And it can be fun. You can, you know, part of your schedule or part of your routine is maybe you always stop at the coffee shop or drive through the coffee shop and get a donut, or, you know, you put something special in your bedtime routine. Put in as much fun as you can, but do keep some sort of a routine with your kids. And then with relation to school, again, they have a schedule there usually, and you will want to, as parents of these neurodiverse kids, to know what that schedule is. So by you knowing and understanding the flow of their day, you know what to ask about, how to check in, how to support the collaboration between home and school, and maybe letting the school know what your morning routines are so that they can catch if something goes off in your morning routine. They'll know that about your child. And I think if there are things that are going wrong in the school routine, they should expect to hear from you that something in the routine is not working, and probably your child, particularly if they're young, might not be able to point that out or ask for that on their own behalf. But as a parent, if you know what your child needs and what the schedule is, get in there and say, hey, can we change this? Or can we provide a little bit more priming or leading in so that the schedule is known and understood and those tricky transitions are minimized or supported. The last thing on this slide that we wanted to call out, and then I'll hand it over to George, is the extracurricular activities. And this is, again, another little bit of a tricky one, because we absolutely don't want and don't think you need to have your kids scheduled every minute of the day. These kids in particular need time also to think and to create and do stuff. But if you have particularly, you know, the time from when they get home from school until when they go to bed is a pretty long time. And so if you can fill some of that space with activities that are meaningful to them, where they have an opportunity to learn new skills or to practice the social interactions, they can be learning skills there that they will eventually be able to use to provide structure to their own time. So if they learn how to do something that they enjoy doing, suddenly, you know, they're adding an hour or half an hour in to do their, I'm moving my hands like knitting and crocheting is coming to my mind. That's probably not what your kids are going to be doing, but whatever the activity is that they could incorporate into their time. But one caveat with that is that they may need you to help them try a few things before you find the one that will stick. So we do want it to be fun, not an extra demand. So it should be something they enjoy doing, but they might not know initially what they enjoy doing. And so I would not stop with them saying, well, I don't want to do that, or I don't know what I want to do. Pick something, be enthusiastic about it, communicate your enthusiasm, have them try it with the understanding that if it doesn't work, we don't have to keep doing it forever. We can try something else to get to those things that really kind of round out who they are and the structure of their day. So George, tell us how you have used structure and what kinds of extracurricular activities go on in your house.
All right. First of all, my name is George. I'm the privileged parent of a 20-year-old neurodiverse student who'll be graduating from high school this year, a 17-year-old who's a student at Temple Grandin as a junior, and then we have a 15-year-old who is in public schools. And so it's been just an incredible journey for us as a family in all of this. And I love the language of container. It's not something that we were introduced to early on, but it was almost intuitive that there was structure that needed to be adjusted. So our story is our oldest, when he was in third grade, fourth grade, in public school, we realized that that structured environment was actually overwhelming for him. We tried the adaptations that the school had available, and we were in a place and blessed to be able to say, okay, well, let's try homeschooling. And so it was taking that structure, which was outside the home, and bringing it into the home, where we were seeing some fairly even, balanced behavior, some management activities that worked. And so we took that and kind of melded home life and homeschool for a period of time. And that was something that we actually did for our other two kids as well. As they all started in public school. And then we were really attracted to the ability to provide a consistent home structure that led towards the school academic structure. And that was a really exciting time in our household overall. What happens as we all grow is that dynamic container. So I wish I could buy the container and just say, here it is, but it does change and it evolves. And so when we got into the middle school, pubescent realities of kind of that, some of those I questioning things as they come and go at different developmental stages, we were searching for new structures and new ways to kind of expand their horizons, as well as contain what they needed to feel safe, secure, and healthy to then be able to even do the academic and extracurricular activities. Each of our kids have had different developmental progress along those lines, but our oldest, when he was 15, was a part of a, what I'm going to call neurotypical youth group through our church. And he was very much accepted. And we were pretty excited about that fact that it was a place that he felt welcomed and he could go. And he was really developing some social ability in trying different things out. What was happening that we missed from a kind of a container checking in perspective is that he was not developing the relationships that he saw outside of himself. He saw amongst other people, and the extracurricular pressures started to really turn him inward even more so, and kind of exacerbate his situation. So our journey with our oldest was then we had to actually provide stronger containers, kind of take away some of the extracurriculars at that point in time because they were too overwhelming socially, just not able to read what was going on and to keep up with the neurotypical. And the neurotypical community wasn't educated to even understand neurodiversity. So that structure, and this is my point, is that it felt like it should, to me intuitively, always expand. And our experience is that it would expand and contract, and expand and contract based on each of our kids' needs and successes, always trying to build on the successes, but sometimes you don't find success till you experience the failure. And so that's kind of our journey within the container world, I'd say. It's almost a breathing kind of container, and it does flex. But it's been that concept and those kind of that language to provide that identity within structure, container, has been a great way for us to help navigate and help our kids navigate as they continue to grow.
Thank you so much for sharing that, George. Appreciate you sharing your story with us. And it's interesting that you talk about the flexible structure because we're going to talk about flexibility as the next element. And you did a good job of illustrating actually both how you had to, you provided structure and then found that as you gave some flexibility that the structure actually needed to come back and be just a little bit tighter. So that's all a part of this that we'll talk about later, the relationship between all of these, that it actually, we learn from our experiences, right? That's exactly what you were talking about. So let's talk a little bit more about flexibility. Flexibility is teaching our children to bend so that they can access what they and life have to offer. We know that if we're too structured, people might break instead of bend. And so we want to teach our kids to be able to flex with situations when they can. So sometimes we just need to recognize when it is that they need that flexibility. For example, when expectations aren't met, they have their heart set on something and it just doesn't happen, or there is a schedule, we get to that structure piece, right? And they're expecting things to happen a certain way, and for whatever reason, Aunt Hilda visits, or their favorite ice cream isn't at the ice cream store, and maybe they just need to, at that point in time, realize, okay, I need to be flexible. We were talking about fatigue earlier. When they're tired, sometimes they might have to flex a little bit more. They might, if we're so tired that we can't do something that we were looking forward to, then we might need to be more flexible in that situation. Also with surprises, there can be good surprises, there can be bad surprises, and something happens to them that they weren't expecting, and that might they might end up getting a little bit dysregulated from that, and that might be a time when we need to help them understand that they can bend a little bit. And then also, just again, that word dysregulation, all the different things that can happen to them that get them spun up. They have an extra hard day at school. Again, something unexpected happens. They are getting too much input visually, or they're just treated a way that they don't like, and they get dysregulated a little bit. We had a student this week, we had some ants in the classroom, and he was just having a hard time with being in the classroom with the ants. So just teaching them in times like that, that they can be flexible, they can choose a different behavior if they want to. And what they can do in those moments, they can access coping skills. Maybe they need to take a break and go off and do something else. If they are too stimulated, maybe they need to go jump on the trampoline a little bit, or they need to pet their dog. Anything like that that really is something meaningful to them that can help them remain flexible through a time when they are a little bit dysregulated. Or they can discover a new motivation. I was working with some students today. They're trying to create this personal project, and there were some students who were having a hard time dealing with the structure of that. So they just couldn't picture themselves being able to do this project. And so it was like, well, let's come at it from a different angle. What's a different motivation, a different way you can look at this? And maybe you can make a proposal to the teacher and see if the teacher can be flexible with you. So these are tools that we can give our kids. At the same time, we can accept that sometimes these kids just can't be flexible in a specific moment. We can't expect that they're going to be able to be flexible all the time. Ross Green, who's a psychologist, he says kids do well if they can, and we really believe that. But these kids are developmentally delayed, and when it comes to flexibility and frustration tolerance, it's a little bit difficult for them. So sometimes they really can't flex, and if we push it, we're going to push them over an edge to their breaking point, and we don't want to do that. Instead, what we can do is we can model flexibility and say, okay, we will be flexible at this point in time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that also in our next webinar, but that's something that we want to make sure that we're modeling for our kids. Beverly is going to share with us a little bit about flexibility and how it works with their kids.
You know, the thing that is the hardest, right? When the kids get in that, really rigid, really stuck, is that, we try all kinds of things to help. Oh, let me help do this. Oh, let's do this, And we've had great support. I know Kristen's going to talk about support, but we've had great support over the years. And one of the things that we were taught as a tool to kind of help in those moments is this idea of be curious. Those words ring in my head all the time. Be curious. Okay, so we've got this situation. We've got this kiddo who's struggling. And my job is to just be curious, to ask questions. And a lot of times I think it helps them to process. It may not be that they have answers right away. They maybe need to sit and think and process, and then they come back. But it's me, instead of imposing what I think the fixes should be, or me giving all the suggestions, me taking the time to first ask questions and listen. And so, as a particular example, our 20-year-old is, looking towards, he really wants to have a job, right? He's coming towards the end of his high school career, really wants to get a job, and he was working with a job coach through DVR and just becoming more and more stressed and more overwhelmed. And so I took the opportunity to just be curious. Where is the stress? And he has his moments where he doesn't want to work at something. He wants things to come easily, like we all do. And I was really just thinking that he was overwhelmed with the tasks of everything that needs to go into finding a job. First, you have to know what you want to do, and then you gotta, fill out applications, and it's this overwhelming process. And in the process of me taking the time to just sit and ask, so what is it that has you stressed? Tell me about how you're feeling, and is it the particular things that your job coach is asking you to do, or is it And as we kind of teased out this whole thing, over a couple of days, he got to the point to say, I don't want to get a job because I'm afraid I'm going to fail. Mind blowing. I don't know how to do these jobs. What if I'm not perfect? Well, all of a sudden, it was an opportunity, a new way to approach that particular stress for him, to go, oh, well, that's why you have this job coach. He's going to help you discover what the job description is. He's going to advocate for you at that job to, work out a job description that's going to work for you and for your skills and your gifts and talents. He's a gifted chef and a gifted welder, and he loves doing both of those things. But the thought of having to go into a job where in his mind he would have to do it perfectly was more than he could handle. And so, again, we got to be able to say, well, this is why you have a job coach, and they're going to come on the job with you, and they're going to work with you until you're comfortable and help you navigate those things that you don't understand or don't know how to do. And so really what happens with this, two simple words of just be curious, it helps them to discover how they need to look at the issue differently. And it helps me as the parent to be flexible in my own ideas, right? It's like, oh, I have to be flexible too. It's kind of what Lisa was saying, is modeling that flexibility, but it comes with me first being recognizing where I need to flex to be able to, support and encourage them. So that's been a helpful little tidbit that we've had, in the last couple of years to really get in. And it takes time. It takes time to really master that skill, because it's a skill. It doesn't just happen. Oh, I asked the question because I'm curious, and then they all automatically have the answer. Sometimes it's that, back and forth, but it brings results every single time. And most of the time I'm wrong. What I thought the issue was is really not the issue, or how I'm looking at it is not how they're looking at it, and stuff. So.
That is so great. I love those words, be curious. Ross Greene refers to that process as drilling, but I think be curious is much friendlier. but we're talking about the same thing, and that is, getting at what's underlying that unwillingness to be flexible. And I think that the process of doing that with kids helps them then to, over time, figure out how they can re-examine and be flexible in their own thinking. I mean, you're talking about doing it with your 20-year-old, and so you can really make a profound breakthrough. You might have a little bit more, incremental steps with a younger child, but the process is still the same. Just being curious and asking those questions, and often, again, it's not what you think. So great. The next slide is a little time to focus on support. And one thing that struck me as I was thinking about these three things and how they go together, we had a psychologist with Micah, our oldest son, who's now 26 almost. And we had the same psychologist for we were fortunate he was diagnosed at age 3, and we worked with the same person almost all the way through until he went away to college. And there are just a couple of aha moments that I had when we were working with him. And it was not that he was so wise and astute and professional that he knew things that I could never know as a parent. It was that he had fresh eyes. He knew my child well from having been in his life and in his community, but he was looking at it with fresh eyes, whereas I was maybe too close to it, or just too engaged to see some of these things. And so just little tiny things that you might think to do differently with your child that someone else might be able to point out to you through support. So having a community of support can really be transformative for your child. It's transformative for you too, and we'll get into that more in our second half of the webinar. But there is a song from a musical about Charlie Brown, If Just One Person Believes in You. And it goes on, it says one person, and then 2, and then 3, and then more. And if all those people believe in you, you can believe in you too. And this really does follow through to our kids. If you have adults, and they can be professionals, sometimes it's their psychologist or their longtime therapist, or a faith leader or an old family friend. It can be anyone, but having adults who believe in your child and come alongside your child and family in a supportive way, I cannot tell you how big a difference that will make. So if you take away only one thing, take that. It helps them move up that hierarchy to get to the point where their bucket is filled and their esteem is there, so that they're ready to step out and become and offer all that they have to offer to the world. So, any of these things on this slide can be supports. School can be a great support. It makes all the difference who's the adult in the room with your child. And the adult who can be that great support could be in a public school classroom, could be at a Temple Grandin School, could be a parent in a homeschool situation, but making sure that the school setting, the place where they spend so much of their time, is a right fit for them. And then building your team to come around your child and make that happen. Again, your communities, any of these communities can fill those roles. And then lastly, the formal services. So finding a therapist that gets your child and can really hone in on the things that you need help with, be they sensory things, you know, social things, emotional, physical things, all those things. You know, we can't do it all as parents. And so having others on our team to support is a great service to ourselves and therefore to our kids. A parent community is also part of that. And so I've been privileged to be a leader, parent, co-walker in our Temple Grandin School community. And I'm going to turn it over to Kristen now, and she can tell you a little bit about her experiences with support and her very gifted son, who is a proud graduate of Temple Grandin School.
Hello, my name is Kristen, and as Jen said, I am the parent of an alumnus at from Temple Grandin School. He graduated last year in the very weird continuation ceremony of the pandemic. But anyway, I'm watching the clock here, so I'm going to go a little bit quick. I have 2 kids on the spectrum, and my older child was only recently diagnosed as an adult, and that's not uncommon. So, but luckily we've had so much experience with my younger child who did go to Temple Grandin. So the journey of getting them all help throughout their education obviously starts with the schools, but we had to pursue every single resource, person, and possibility with the singular goal in mind of getting our kids all the help we could find them. There was many failures, many successes, and the years-long realization it took to understand we're not alone. We're not, it feels like it so many times, you're totally alone. But thanks to Temple Grandin School and all the other supports we discovered over years, our kids are well on the way to semi-independent lives that they're going to love, that they do love. The thing about support is searching for it, and I'm going to echo George here, is that it's a moving target, right? It's always changing. It's a relentless pursuit. It takes so much effort. Help is everywhere, but we parents ultimately are still the ones at the wheel, and we have to drive this bus for our kids. And the next Guiding Bright Minds webinar is going to be all about how we keep going, how we keep our foot on the gas there by self-care. It's required for this life we have as families with autism. It has to be addressed. So, and now serving on the board of directors at Temple Grandin School, I'm just learning so much more again about the adult side of transitioning our kids into adulthood. But again, as George said, the target keeps moving because the kids, they're growing up, they're changing. And just when you think you got something nailed down, right, new stage, the first diagnoses, puberty, transition to adulthood. It's, yeah, the only constant is change. So my first tip is stay organized, but if that all that is a giant accordion file or a box or a drawer in your desk, keep everything in one place. It can be so overwhelming. I'm just kind of going to go down that list on the PowerPoint slide there. For the school, making sure it's a right fit. Well, you can start with talking to other families through social media groups specific to your area or specific to autism. And for some of us, there's frequently not a lot of choices. But, and also learn that you need to understand that many of your support services cannot recommend a school. Even though they know it, they can't say it legally. So you have to go around to the informal ways. You need to, if you think you're zeroing in on a school, you need to go talk to them and then go with your gut on their response. These are people, okay? Tour the place. Don't just settle for whatever school you're assigned, and meet the principal first or meet the leader first. Leaders set the culture for the entire school. It could be very different from the next school down the road. But again, I can't emphasize enough, go with your gut. Meet the SPED teachers, meet the teachers who will be working with your child. Charter schools don't always have the district-wide resources, and I'm talking public school, not private, that don't always have the district-wide resources that non-charter schools have and operate on their own budgets, so they frequently can do the minimum. And that was my experience, cutting corners because their finances are so different. But I think the most important thing, as far as whatever school you end up in, you start first with building relationships with the people at the school. Don't walk in there with an adversarial kind of attitude. We spend our lives fighting for our kids, but guess what? There's all these educators who really are interested in their success as well. So what really worked for our family is our goal first was to build relationships with the people at our kids' school with the goal of working together to our kids' success. And sometimes that's hard to remember because, again, we've been fighting so long, but really that was very successful for us. You can also, I'm going to put a link in the chat. This is where in Colorado, you can actually see your states or your school's performance and ratings on a lot of different things. So if you're looking for a new school, this does not include a school like Temple Grandin. This is public schools. And then as far as the school services they offer, some districts will have center schools or schools that specialize in a particular significant disability where identified students are actually bused. So find out about those facilities. Find out about, you know, what is their behavior plans. Determine how often the school, maybe if you can, determine how often they have interactions with the police with students with disabilities. These are all things to consider as far as a data point to finding out what school you choices you have. Find out about after school care. I'm going to move down to communities on this list. Extended families, friends, and neighbors. Now, in our experience, there was family, friends, and neighbors who jumped in and said, we're on this journey with you. We're going to support you all the way. Your kid doesn't scare us. But I'm going to be honest, there is going to be family, friends, and neighbors who have no idea what to do. And so their reaction is distance. And that's the opposite of support, but you can't blame them. They don't have any idea what to do. So I found a lot of support in social media groups and online for specific to your family's disability. Now, these are usually private groups on Facebook like Autism Society of Colorado or National Autism Society. There's email lists like Guiding Bright Minds. You know, you start connecting with people. And it's been especially important during this COVID isolation. Formal services, non-governmental agency resource centers and clearinghouses, again, like Guiding Bright Minds, therapists of all kinds, including cognitive behavioral therapists, occupational therapists, and then there's the government agencies. DVR has been huge in our son's life as far as getting, and started back when he was in school. Not, even though he's graduated, they started working with him in his early teens to, they weren't able to do a lot because they're all about employment, but they were ready for him when he graduated and was ready to enter the workforce. I think the main jumping off point for getting started on all these supports, including Medicaid or any of that, is your community-centered board. Community-centered board. That is for Boulder County. It's called, and they have weird kind of names, like in Boulder County, it's Imagine. So I'm going to put up this link to a PDF to find your local community center board. Okay, and that is a PDF. And then we're kind of running out of time, so I also wanted to give you an overview. The community center board is a government kind of clearinghouse, and then they offer another link here. I'm going as fast as I can. Another link here. Did that do it? For sort of a broad discussion of home and community-based services that your community center board will get you hooked up with, all kinds of stuff like Medicaid and job and therapy services. And it's not doing it, is it? So once I get that link up, I'm all done. Let me just try one more time. So you can, I'm going to mute myself so you can wrap up, Kyle.
Great, great.
Keep working on that, Kristen. Thanks for sharing those. Those are great. Lisa, if you just want to go ahead to the pretty one, the pretty picture. So as we said earlier, it can be chaotic, but it can also be beautiful like this, working with these kiddos. You can see all these little triangles that are connected, and they're different shapes and they're different colors, but they're all triangular. And so those three elements do work together. And we're going to move on. I don't know how we're doing on time. I know we were going to try and shift into question and answers around 8. So let me sum up and give you kind of a takeaway assignment, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. Does that sound okay, Kyle?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. So again, here are our 3 elements: the structure, flexibility, and support. And you'll get these when you get the slides. But we're going to leave you on the next slide with a question to ponder of, you know, what might you do between now and the time that we hopefully see you again, without overwhelming yourself, to boost the impact of any one or more of these 3? How might you add more structure to your child's life routines, your home life, you know, checking in on the school structure? How might you try some of these techniques of being curious and helping your child to grow in flexibility? Or how might you add more support to your team? So Kristen's given us a lot of very specific resources. We've talked about some general areas that you might look for support. And we'll check back with you when we come back around in June to see what you've found and what questions you might add to these as you continue to work on these things. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, and we'll take a few minutes for questions if there are any.
Wonderful. And just for our attendees, we're going to plan on wrapping up right around 8:15. So if you need to leave, we understand, but if you'd like to stay, we'd love to have you for Q&A. So if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll take some time to address those. I just want to say, you know, first, as we wait for some questions, thank you all very much. And Lisa and Jen, it's so great to hear from you, because you've got the expertise both with the school and all of your backgrounds, and then in your family. And Kristen and George, and I just, you know, again, thankful for your input too, specifically as parents. And I think everything you said tonight was really poignant, and hopefully our audience is really able to take away 1 or 2 nuggets that you shared that they can implement in their life or search out as a resource to really make a difference. So thank you all very much. And, you know, I was, you know, Jen, when you started presenting and throughout our presentation, you mentioned anxiety. And, you know, by the way, if you haven't seen, Temple Grandin has sent out a series for Autism Awareness Month, a series of videos. And in one of your videos, it was one with your staff. And we shared it on LinkedIn today because we were so impressed by it. And one of your staff members says, we want our community to know that these kids, sometimes they look like they're trying to be defiant, but it's actually the anxiety that's going through them. They don't know the proper way to they're unable to react in, you know, in kind of the traditional response. And I thought that was so poignant. And, you know, Jen or Lisa, if you could just talk just a minute about that, because I think, again, all of you parents, you know, and our attendees probably know this through experience, but I think it's so important that we help spread that word and get that out there, because it is so true.
Yeah, it's absolutely so true. And we see anxiety expressed in a lot of different ways at the school. You know, some kids will internalize and kind of go into a shutdown mode. Other kids will get mad and, you know, maybe slam things. And we don't have a lot of super severe behaviors, but you know, they lose it a little bit, become dysregulated and express that externally. And I think as parents and teachers and people who are advocating on behalf of these students, we have to not take any of that personally, you know, and not assume that we know where the behavior is coming from. So that comes back around to the being curious. I cannot tell you how many times as a parent I had the experience of, you know, somebody decided that they knew why my son was doing a certain thing. And then the response from the school was a behavioral disciplinary system kind of response, when really what he needed was an understanding, supportive, maybe even bordering sometimes into therapeutic realm of a response. And so, yeah, that's a key message to get out. And I'm really glad that it came through in our staff video.
Yeah,
Understanding is one of our core values at Temple Grandin School, and that's a huge part of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for doing those videos. I thought they were.
Yeah, with Lisa was the videographer on those.
Good job, Lisa. Good job. So we do have a couple questions, really great questions. So first, for anybody, any of our presenters, what kind of structure have you found helpful on the weekend days? So with your parent hat on, what kind of structure have you found helpful on the weekend days? George and Beverly, do you have anything you want to share on that?
You know, our family likes to eat. And our oldest, being a chef at heart, you know, considers himself quite the foodie. And so we learned really early on that hangry is our biggest obstacle. And school naturally gives you those, you know, meal times, right? You know, you eat breakfast before you go to school, you eat when you're at lunch and when you're at school, and you come home and you eat dinner and stuff. And so we really, on the weekends, really tried to make sure that we were building a routine and breaking up the day with meals and snacks. Because, you know, the temptation on the weekend is to sleep in, right? Oh, well, you sleep in, that means all of a sudden breakfast isn't happening until 10, and then maybe lunch, if you're not busy, is at 2. But we really found that we had to have that anchor, that, you know, and the container and the structure of going, we've got to keep meal times consistent with during the week. And then all of a sudden that whole day with the kids isn't this daunting, overwhelming thing. Okay, we've got a chunk of time between breakfast and lunch. We get through that. Okay, now we've got a chunk of time between lunch and snack, you know, and it broke the day up for me, especially in those years that I was homeschooling, because you're stuck with them all day, you know, and stuff. And so really meals became, and then we avoided the hangry, and it always gave everybody something to look forward to. So.
And it sounds like you really used a nice balance of structure and flexibility there on the weekends, which would seem to work well.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Hangry is the worst, but yeah, maintain that physical routine that they got to have during the week. Maintain it on the weekends. And then the other thing I'd like to add as far as structure is, we call it front loading. If we're going to, whatever we're going to do on the weekends, even though it was within the structure of meeting physical needs the same as the week, we talk about it days ahead. And then 2 days ahead, then 1 day ahead, they know what's coming.
Yeah.
Great thought. Great suggestion, Kristen. All right. Thank you both for answering that. Here's another one. Where can you get support for help transitioning to college or employment. This person's son is 16, doesn't qualify for much due to giftedness and high adaptive scores, but has high anxiety as well.
Have they, is there an official diagnosis of an anxiety disorder or anything? If there's any kind of official diagnosis, you jump right on that, the community-based, what's that link that is that second link? I put up the PDF. Yeah. If they have any kind of official diagnosis, jump on that PDF link I sent you and get in touch with your community-based boards. And they can get you started on what kind of transition and help is available to your child.
Yeah, you know, and there are various private organizations that specialize in that too. You know, college living experience, collegiate coaching. There are some other links that we could potentially share, perhaps offline, Kyle, with folks that we know that we've worked with. And you know, it does depend on your setting. Some of the school districts have programs too. The School to Work Alliance program within a school district should be able to help kids who are in that 16 to 21, 23 kind of range.
And what's the name of that that role in the public schools that I think is it a SWAT?
SWAP.
SWAP, yeah.
To Work Alliance program, SWAP. Yep.
Yes.
Well, and again, I just have to spotlight TACT. Now, TACT is specifically designed for kids on the spectrum, but it's teaching the autistic community trades. And so they do automotive and welding and STEM and stuff, but they're linked in as well. So even if your son doesn't have, or your child doesn't have a diagnosis, to reach out to some of those organizations that specifically look at vocational training and stuff, I mean, they're all a network, and they might be able to refer you to an organization that can help with that.
And TAC does like camps. So over spring break, they'll do like a 2 or 3 day camp over summer. And they're real approachable. So it's like dipping your toe into the water. That it's not a, okay, now you're in, let's run kind of thing. It's very methodical.
Yes, you have to keep contacting all these different, remember you're driving the bus.
Lucky, you get to luckily drive that bus. So many responsibilities. So with that, speaking of that, and we all mentioned this during this webinar, definitely come back in June for the second webinar where we're talking about the flexibility and support and structure for you, because I think, as Lisa said, being a parent of a neurodiverse child requires a lot of time and energy and structure and flexibility and support, everything we talked about tonight. And it's important that you take time to focus on you. And in June, we're going to address that. So with that, George, Beverly, Kristen, Lisa, Jen, thank you all so much for being with us tonight and sharing your wisdom and thoughts with the community. And just can't thank you enough for your time. And please remember, for those of you that joined us as attendees, we're going to go ahead and send out a link to this webinar for all of you. Feel free to share it with others that you think might benefit from it. And we also hope you'll take an opportunity to explore the Guiding Bright Minds website, as well as Temple Grandin. So thank you all so very much. And we hope everybody has a wonderful end of their evening.